Hi, everyone. We are today going to get into your presentations on the heroes of the industrialization of York County. I want to thank you for the work you put into these. Altogether, we took it seriously. We did a very good job with everything, and I appreciate that. Now, I wasn't sure necessarily from this distance learning mindset of what presentations would look like, but you've encouraged me to see where else we can go with things, and I appreciate your effort. Now, altogether, our overall objective is to evaluate the contributions of York County business leaders that made York an industrial powerhouse and those that continue driving York County's economy today. We're going to take a look at each one of these people. I'm going to try to be fairly quick about it because I don't want to read every single word. You can go back to this presentation later. I just want to try to build an overall summary of some of their achievements and what they did. So we'll start off first. Thomas Shipley, that is known today for Shipley Energy, but he kind of actually created that company by mistake. Well, just by happenstance, but not really by mistake. But anyway, Thomas Shipley started out working with the York Manufacturing Company, and he wasn't the president right away, but he rose up to some of the higher realms of the company, and he started to increase what they were doing when it came to ice machinery, when it came to refrigeration. And the company, when he first took it over, only had 50 employees. By the time he was done, it had over 500 employees. And York Manufacturing Company, again, an ice machinery company or an ice making company and a refrigeration company, eventually then transferred into air conditioning and became York International. Today it's Johnson Controls. And they are a huge company. They've been a huge company for York County, but Thomas Shipley was the figurehead in place that made it humongous back in the 1910s and 1920s. And then he also, weirdly, decided to install a gasoline station in the York Manufacturing Company's facility in West York, created that in 1933, and it ended up taking off, and it became one of the biggest gas companies within this region. So Shipley Energy is still around today, simply because Thomas Shipley wanted to have a gas station at York Manufacturing Company, and then his sons took it over after he passed away and turned it into what it is today. But he's one of those big business leaders that made York County have a great factory base. William Goodrich. This guy's story is a story of a slave that was apprenticed to a barber in York County, actually to a tanner in York County. He became a barber later. But when he was freed, he decided to open up a barber shop. And then, when that was successful, he then opened up a hardware store, opened up a candy shop, opened up a hotel, had his own railroad cars. But this guy was amazingly successful for an African American man, especially back in the 1840s and 1850s. Now, he did not die here. He died in the Midwest in our country, but he had to flee because of the Confederate Army. When the Confederate Army came here in 1863, William Goodrich disappeared. And then he popped up in Chicago, and he started up businesses out in that region. But altogether, he could not really stay here just because he was very afraid that if he was captured, he'd be enslaved again. He also dedicated his life on the Underground Railroad, like he dedicated his house, his property, his railroad cars to trying to hide runaway slaves that were trying to find their freedom on the Underground Railroad. So he put himself out there in his house today at 124 East Philadelphia Street has been opened up as an Underground Railroad memorial stop. And so you can actually go to his house, visit his house. They even have historical presentations there, especially every first Friday. But you can go there almost any day of the week as long as it's open. Right now, during coronavirus time or quarantine, it's not going to be open. But when things open back up, you can go check out this gentleman's house and go see where he hid runaway slaves. Now, one of my favorites here, Louie Appel. This guy donated more than perhaps almost any Yorker in history. And you wouldn't know it because he didn't want to have his name on stuff. But this guy, his father was involved within Pfaltzgraff pottery. But also he was involved in advertising billboards. He was involved in radio. He was involved in television. He was involved in cable companies. But Louie Appel had he had his hand in so many different businesses. And he took the money he made and he put it back into York County. He gave to so many different causes. One of the big ones was the Strand Capitol Theater that's located downtown. He's the one that kept that theater alive. We would not have any kind of performance facility if he did not donate millions of dollars to that facility to keep it around. And today, that actually has his name on it. They've turned it into the Appel Center for the Performing Arts, but they want to dedicate themselves to him and to his legacy after he passed away just a couple years ago. But a beautiful York County person and somebody who had a great heart for York and never cared for anybody else to really know that much about his name. He just wanted to make York better for you and me. Donald Graham is somebody I'm going to talk about again in the future here, but this guy is a business person that is gigantic in York today, and hardly anybody even seems to know about him. He created a company that is a plastics company, and today is a pseudo plastics company that's trying to be cutting edge and getting away from the use and the building of plastic materials any longer. So they try to create things that are biodegradable. But Donald Graham in 1960, in a basement of a farmhouse in Dover, created what is today one of the biggest plastic packaging and pseudo-plastic packaging companies in the entire country. They make products for all sorts of different things, such as Powerade, Clorox, automotive oils. But every single, like when I walk through the grocery store, I see this could be a gram package. This could be a gram package. This is a gram piece. This. But this company is everywhere, and they make hundreds of millions of dollars each year. But a fantastic York-based company that he built back in 1960, and he's still leading it. He's still kicking today, and he is a great York County. And he also does give back. He gives back to York College and Penn State York. Those are some of the biggest contributors or contributions that he's given in his life. But a great York County man and a great business leader. Now, moving to another one from back in the late 1800s to early 1900s, J.A. Dempwolf, this gentleman here, was the architect of York County, especially York City. And he also was the architect for like Frederick, Maryland, and a number of other cities up through Pennsylvania and Maryland. But this guy created Central Market. He created St. John's Lutheran Church, York College, the York County Courthouse, the York Bank, the Bonton. But basically, every single time you walk around York and you see a historic building or something that just has a flair and something amazing to it, J.A. Dempwolf was the architect of it. If the government or if a great business wanted to create a building that just had something special to it, he's the guy. And houses today, there are some special houses downtown that are just extremely artistic, and it's always J.A. Dempwolf who is the architect. Like he created just legendary different buildings that York County still treasures today. So when I walk around York and I admire the different pieces of architecture, I realize that's Dempwolf. His influence is everywhere. P.H. FabFilter, when you go through Spring Grove and you smell that distinctive paper smell, he's the one that turned Spring Grove into the paper city. Now, he had worked in a paper company, and his boss told him about this great opportunity in a place called Spring Forge, which is now Spring Grove. And he decided to buy that mill that his boss had told him about for $14,000. And he turned it into a gigantic facility. He actually, in 1880, purchased the largest paper making machine in the entire country, and he installed it in that Spring Grove facility. Basically, just like I think about Milton Hershey building Hershey, Pennsylvania, P.H. Gladfelter is the person that built Spring Grove in York County. Like basically every single person that lived in Spring Grove worked for the paper company, and just up and down, like the town is there because of him. He also gave money to churches and a number of different facilities, but he was the main employer for a great portion of York County, just a huge business that wouldn't have been there without him, and it still is operating today. Next one here, Bob Huffman. This guy, when he was young, took a great interest in weightlifting, and then he made that his craft. He made that his business. In the 1930s and 1940s and in the 1950s, he actually became the U.S. weightlifting coach. And he coached multiple Mr. Americas and Olympic medalists, and he was a legendary weightlifting coach. And he actually even got a friend of his who was a coach for U.S. swimming to come here too. So we were basically like extremely high level in fitness back in the 1930s to the 1950s. And we had all sorts of swimmers and weightlifters who were absolutely world class lifting and training here. He also created York Barbell, a company that was stationed in York, specifically North York. And Barbell became the premier weight company throughout the entire world. When you saw weight competitions, when you went to the Olympics back in the 1980s and 1990s, they were always using York barbell plates. Only sad thing is, in 2003, York Barbell sold, long after Bob Huffman passed away, sold to a company in a different country, and the York Barbell name has suffered for it. Their weights are not the same quality, at least in most weightlifters' belief, as they were back when Bob Huffman was running the company. But they were the premier company back then. Now, his influence can be seen. He helped create Rudy Park and gave a ton of money to create Rudy Park in East York. And he also donated over $1.2 million to the YMCA. He really appreciated the different facilities the YMCA has in York, the different programs they put on for especially young people. And so he devoted a ton of money to them. Max Grumbacher, this guy, his family, back in 1898, took a little bit of a gamble and they created a store that was called the Bon Ton. And the Bon Ton was a variety store, primarily a clothing store, but eventually started to sell furniture and a variety of other goods. And Bon Ton became huge. And it's a very sad thing for me because I love that store. And just 2 years ago, the Bon Ton went under and finally closed in August of 2018. But the Bon Ton and the different subsidiary stores were all over Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware. They were all over the place. And it was a great, great variety store, retail store. But sadly, places like Amazon just outpaced it, and the Grumbacher family had to go out of business. Um, Grumbacher does have an influence, especially with the York College. Their athletic facility that has a rock climbing wall and has their basketball courts and their wrestling area, that's actually called the Grumbacher Center. And so the Grumbacher family still was giving to places like York College, even just a few years ago before the Bon Ton went under. So a little bit sad that that company's gone. It was a fantastic York-based company back until it closed its doors. But Max Grumbacher still has an influence. His family still has an influence in York County, and they were great for York for 120 years. Now, to finish this lesson, and also to kind of recap some of the people from yesterday's lesson on some of the other people that we did not include within these presentations, but to go into all the York County business people, go to the quizzes, take it a couple times. These are a little bit challenging because some of these names you've never heard of before. So don't just play it one time. If you can't get a perfect score the first time, play it and play it and play it again. And just make sure you have a good understanding of some of these big contributors that made York County what it is today and gave us such a great industrial base, such a great factory base that made us an absolute powerhouse, not just in Pennsylvania, but in the entire nation. All right, thanks. See you next time.